Good afternoon. On behalf of the Merrick House Board of Governors, welcome to 100 Voices. Our full title is 100 Voices, Yesteryear Stories of Coral Gables. I'm Joanne Meagher. We Merrick House docents would be ever so thrilled if these walls could talk, but luckily people can, and as we've learned from 13 of these such gatherings, there are plenty of stories to tell. And we are delighted that June Thompson Morris is here to regale us with a few more gleaned from her research as well as her own family history. For the benefit of those of you for whom the Merrick House is a new old place, please know that our dedicated docents are thrilled to tell the Merrick family story. We are open weekends for tours at 1, 2, and 3 o'clock. Now, today in the house, there she is, one of our very biggest fans, Mayor 85, Dorothy Thompson. And I want you to know that Dorothy comes to every one of these, whether her daughter is speaking or not. Dorothy, thank you so much for your unwavering support of the Merrick House and all things Merrick. When we break for refreshments on the veranda this evening, you will have an opportunity to say hello to some of our governing board members. Those who I see are with us right now are Mary Beth Burke, who's over here in the stripe. Alexis Aaronhoff, who I think is back there by Ethan, our wonderful videographer. And Bonnie Syke, president of our strongest partner organization, the Coral Gables Garden Club, but she also happens to be a member of the board of the Merrick House, and Bonnie's standing with us. Have I missed anyone who snuck in? No? Okay. As well as our docents. So guess what? You get to talk to Mary Beth Burke twice, because Mary Beth is also a docent, as am I. And Dario Gonzalez, there's Dario. Patricia Mackay is seated. Kitty Terry, who just came in. Kitty's back here. And Maddie Wynn. And Maddie and Patricia were giving tours today, and I heard some of Maddie's tour, and it was fantastic, Maddie, so good for you. And our docent coordinator extraordinaire, Gay Bondurant, who asked me if she can have the floor for a few minutes. I don't know what it's about, but Gay, come on up.
It's a perfect transition, because today I am here to acknowledge the Team Merrick Docent Corps. 8 dedicated volunteers who have kept the Merrick House open every available weekend for the last 2.5 years since I've been docent coordinator. We've lost 1 or 2 along the way, but the remaining 8 have been with us for at least a year and some much longer. They continue to carry out their commitment to be on guide duty at least 2 days a month, and occasionally more when necessary. They have been present for special events and private tours. No one has failed to report for duty without sufficient prior notice. They have represented the city of Coral Gables and its oldest and most foundational historic site with confidence and in a relaxed and friendly manner. They take pride in showing off this beautiful home and telling the Merrick story to the many guests who have come to visit. Specifically, since October 2024, the beginning of this fiscal year, we have already welcomed over 1,400 visitors and conducted slightly over 100 tours. Many of those visitors are residents from right here in Coral Gables, but some have come to see beautiful Coral Gables from as far away as Azerbaijan and my favorite, Transylvania. So to my troop of dedicated docents, please stand up as I call your name and stay standing. My many thanks to their support in this fun and important contribution to the city, and I have Coral Gables Centennial lapel pins for each of you. Maddie is our newest one. Maddie, would you stand up? Up there. Maddie's been with us 1 year and 3 months. Dario Gonzalez has been with us for 2 years. Raul Hernandez, I don't think he's going to be able to come today. These people do have lives, so it's, Patricia McKay has been with us for 2 years and almost 3. member might be late, but he's been with us for 3 years. Kitty Terry has been with us at least 3 years and 3 months. Mary Beth Burke, once again. She is a Merrick House Governing Board member, of course, and she's been here 6 years and 3 months. And the unstoppable Joanne Meagher has been with us 6 years and 6 months. So I will find you and give you your docent pin, your centennial pins. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
And you might recognize the name of the person who's coming up now to introduce our very special guest speaker. And that might be someone that he knows her a little bit. So Alan Morris, please come up and introduce.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to introduce June Thompson Morris, who is a native of Coral Gables and Coral Gables High School, and a graduate of the Journalism School at the University of Florida, and the esteemed McDill School of Journalism at Northwestern University for her master's degree. She was immediately snapped up by a television station in Salt Lake City, then hired away by a larger market in Phoenix, and then hired away by the premier market in Los Angeles with KNBC, and then recruited from there to San Francisco, and then recruited back, who desperately wanted her in Phoenix, by a television station in Phoenix. And then she decided to take a respite and go to Boise, Idaho, where she was the voice of the Department of Transportation in Idaho and helped change their whole public relations image in the state of Idaho. I have found her to be an incredibly diligent researcher and a insightful observer and obsessively honest reporter and an inspiring, fun, amazing storyteller. And I've also discovered that she ain't a bad looker either. Delighted to introduce you to my wife, June Elizabeth Thompson Morris.
Thank you. I brought some friends. Do you want to come in? Don't you want to sit someplace else? Okay. You go sit down. Thank you, Alan. Every woman wants their husband to introduce them in such style. Well, here it is, Greetings from Paradise, a play that I've written that's going to premiere at Miracle Theater on April 29th. And it says, A Love Story by June Thompson Morris in celebration of Coral Gables' centennial. Well, it is a love story, and it's a true love story as well. And I heard it directly from my grandmother's lips. Here are my grandparents, Robert and Lucy Thompson. When Lucy lived in Indiana, she went by Lucy May. But when she eventually got down here, she shortened it to Lucy, so she could sound a little more sophisticated, I suppose. I say they're Florida pioneers because I think that anyone who would go through the great Florida land boom of 1925, suffer the consequences of the bust, and then live through the hurricane of 1926, and eventually make their permanent home in Florida, deserve to be called Florida pioneers. So as the story goes, that my grandmother told me, that I later verified, is that at 18 years old, she met this older man at a dance. Now, you know from Gone with the Wind, they used to have these big dances, right? So this was a time, my grandfather was a World War I vet, and he went to Purdue University and then Indiana Law School. And my great-grandfather actually was mayor of Greensburg, Indiana, where the Thompson family was originally from. So we got a couple of mayors in the family. But after that stint, they moved to Indianapolis, and he became a comptroller of Manufactured Hanover's Bank. And my grandfather, a newly graduated law student, was hired by this bank consortium to go down to Miami to close land deals. Another part of that story is that the Carl Fisher family, Carl Fisher of Miami Beach fame, is also from Greensburg, Indiana. All right? But then Carl moved over with his brothers, I'll tell you that story in a little bit, to Indianapolis. And my grandfather was also persuaded by the stories of Carl Fisher and what he was building there. And of course, there was all kinds of things, publications talking about this new place in the world called Miami. And so he got lured down there, but he came back and he went to this dance. And he was 26 and she was 18. So he goes back to Miami and a correspondence begins. And now, you know, in those days, it wasn't just a text message, what's up? People wrote these beautiful long letters. Writing letters was an art form. And so they wrote back and forth, and I am sure, I'm taking poetic justice here, poetic license, to say that they also sent postcards back then. A lot of them would say, greetings from paradise, right? Or greetings from Miami. You see them even today. So they corresponded for about a year, and then he sent her a train ticket. So now she's 19, and she's in Indiana, and this man is asking her to go on the train down to Florida, to this new place called Miami. Somehow she convinced her mother that this was a marriage proposal. Because why else would this man be sending her a train ticket? You know, knowing that she was a good girl, her father was a Methodist preacher and all that sort of thing. Her mother took the bait, said, okay, you can do it, but if he doesn't marry you immediately, you get back on the next train and come back home. And she promised to do that. Her reputation was at stake. Remember, 1924? This is scandalous. So she came down on the train. Now here's the Miami train depot. A little bit later, you can tell by the cars down there, I don't know, 1930s or so, but it shows you a little bit of what Miami looked like back then. It's kind of a dusty, dirty place. I have more to say about that in a moment. All right, thank you. So I looked at the map to see how she would get down. And you know, Henry Flagler, you can hear more about him in a minute, he built the Florida East Coast Railroad, a straight line down the east coast of Florida. But to get from Indiana there, this young girl, 19, who's never traveled in her life, by herself, got on and off trains and came down. Luckily for me, he was an honorable man, and he married my grandmother. And lucky for my mother, because she married their son. And they had an adventurous life together. She got there just in time for the Great Florida Land Boom of 1925. And here are a couple of pictures I've collected for you to look at. You can see all the Tin Lizzies over there, all the jalopies, and that's Flagler Street. It was non-stop traffic all the time. I'm not going to give it away with the buildup of the population that's coming later, but I'll say it now just so you know. In 1925 alone, 2.5 million people moved into the state. All right? It was amazing, amazing. They either, like 4,000 people a day, either by car or by train or by steamboat. So you can see at the top there, that's also Flagler. That's where it was all happening. And I'm going to tell you why it's called Flagler, aside from the fact that it's Henry Flagler. But anyway, there are Coral Gables buses there because how is George Merrick going to persuade people to leave the beach or leave downtown Biscayne Boulevard and go all the way inland on a rocky road to Coral Gables? So he had to send these buses for them. And there's George Merrick down below with Doc Dammers next to him. All right, some other folks that maybe some of you know that I don't. And then you see these people there looking at a site map. It was a crazy, crazy time. And the reason all these people came down, I'll just say very briefly, is because World War I was a dismal time. It was a bloody, nasty war. There were lots and lots of deaths. And people were tired of being miserable. Those Victorian mores of the 1800s were melting away pretty quickly. We talk about how fast things are moving right now with AI. We can't keep up with the progress of technology. Well, guess what? There's nothing new under the sun. Because back then they had a hard time keeping up as well. They were going through the Industrial Revolution, and then it was the age of invention. My grandfather was an inventor. A lot of people were inventors. Carl Fisher was an inventor. Henry Flagler was an inventor. It was the start of consumerism, and people had a lot of money in their pocket after World War I. When people came back and the economy started going again, and people were ready to kick up their heels, right? And it brought on the Roaring Twenties. That's why. People were tired of being miserable, and they were tired of living on the farm. There's an old song during World War I, or afterwards, that said, how are you going to keep them down on the farm now that they've seen Grand Prairie? And that's what was happening. People were leaving the farms, and they wanted to have some fun. And Addison Meisner, Carl Fisher, George Merrick were advertising to the world that this was the place to have fun. And as a matter of fact, when you think about the Roaring Twenties, you think about Chicago, New York, maybe even California. It was naughtier down here. Naughtier by far. The booze was flowing because we had all this unguarded coastline, the rum coming over from the Bahamas and so forth. The night of the Arizona Biltmore. Here I go again. I keep calling it the Arizona Biltmore. The night the Miami Biltmore opened, it even says in the records the champagne was flowing. So I have a couple more pictures. That's my grandfather. And I thought that this might be him closing a land deal until I started looking at his outfit a little closer. And he's got a bow tie on. It looks like almost a tuxedo jacket. Look how long the jackets were back then. But the look was the Palm Beach look. And all the men wore white shirts and white pants, many times white shoes, all that sort of thing. And over there is a still shot I took from a video of people looking at land on Miami Beach. So when I started looking closer at my grandmother's story, because I always wanted to write about it, I asked my mother for every possible photograph she had of my grandparents. And she gave me some slides that I had converted. I looked at everything, and I found this one picture of them sitting in front of a fountain in Coral Gables. And I went, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And so it's around 1925. So I put it on Facebook, and I said, please help me find this exact fountain, because so many fountains kind of look alike. So people were sending me the photographs and telling me where this fountain was. And finally, I went out myself, and I found this one, and this is the one. I'll leave my mic to tell you that. I had to follow this. You see this? Where the exposed coral rock is? Yeah. It's here. See that? The exposed coral rock? Right? I had to follow that. I wish a little bit over, and we would have had it perfect. But that's it. It was kind of fun to do that. So go ahead.
So where is it? It's Balboa, right?
It's a Granada and Coral Way on the southeast corner. And I think it's kind of fun to think that my grandmother, when that photo was taken, she was not thinking, well, someday my granddaughter might be living right up the street, 100 years from now. So, to write what I thought, I started with a screenplay. I think I've read every single book on Florida's history. And I love all my books. In fact, I'm going to tell you guys something. You have to listen closely to everything I say, because at the end there's a quiz and there's prizes. So I'll show you. This is my very favorite book about Henry Flagler. How many people have read it? Okay, you are disqualified. If you have the book, or if you will not read it, do not play the game and win the book. I want someone to win the book who's never read this, okay? Bubble in the Sun. Who's read it? Awesome book. Awesome book, right? Okay, so there's that one to win. But if you've read it, if you have it, don't play. And then Arbor Park's book, right? I have so many copies of these books. I'm giving these books away because I have so many copies. I don't know how or why, but it turned out that way. How many people have read this book? Right? You're disqualified. So, and then we have Patrick Alexander with us today. Stand up, Patrick. He has written a couple of books. Building Paradise is one of the books that I read for my research. And he's just come out with this book, The First 100 Years. The First 100 Years. So you have a chance to win his book today, too. Okay.
Can you buy that book somewhere?
Books and books. You can buy it at Books and Books. Okay?
You're good.
Here we go. In researching, I want to say, I found so many fascinating stories that are not in my screenplay and they're not in my play. because there's no room for them. But like the parallels between then and now, things are the same, but they're different, right? There's so much to say about that. The untold story of Miami coming to age in the jazz era that I mentioned a few minutes before. And then there's a theme that I want to focus on today with you: fortunes gained and lost, Miami's visionaries and their fatal passion to create. It's a fascinating story. Let's start with a story about a man who helped build modern Florida, a man whose life was a true journey from rags to riches, and in a way, back to rags. Henry Morrison Flagler was born in 1830 in a tiny town called Hopewell in upstate New York. My mother's also from upstate New York, from Peekskill. His father was a Presbyterian minister, which means the family had no money. At 14 years old, the family packed him up and sent him to work in Ohio with his uncle in a store. He was done with school after the 8th grade. And that's what happened in a lot of families. If they didn't have a lot of money, they'd send the son usually to work as an apprentice somewhere. Well, from the beginning, Flagler had a head for business. He worked hard, he saved money, and he looked for every opportunity to get ahead. He was not a partier. He was not a womanizer. This kid was a serious young man, and he wanted to make something of himself. He moved from the store to the grain trade, then to whiskey distilling, and eventually tried his hand at salt mining. Every job taught Tom something new and built upon the one before. After marrying a young woman named Mary Harkness, he got back into the grain business because her family was in the grain business, and that's where fate stepped in. He met a young man named J.D. Rockefeller, who was also in the grain business at that time, and the two hit it off, fast friends. When Rockefeller decided to leave the grain world and launch his own oil refinery in Cleveland, because Cleveland, Ohio was where all that was happening, he came to Flagler to help raise capital. Now at this point, Flagler was 36 years old, almost 10 years older than Rockefeller, and a far more seasoned businessman. He brought in his wealthy stepbrother, Stephen Harkness, who was Mary's uncle. Okay, you figured that out. I was like, okay, his stepbrother, Stephen Harkness, Mary's uncle, I had to look into that. She is not a blood relation to Henry Flagler, but she's related in that way. Well, Stephen Harkness invested $100,000, and that's about $2.25 million in today's money, but one condition, that Flagler had to be made a full partner. He wanted someone at the helm that he can trust with his money. That partnership became Standard Oil, and it changed the world. Rockefeller may be the name that we all know, but even he has said multiple times that Standard Oil's success was because of Henry Flagler. By the 1880s, the two men were amongst the richest in America. Woo! This is cool. I love that. I don't know what that was, but I love it. But you know, Flagler was a quiet giant. While Rockefeller made headlines with his philanthropy and civic involvement, Flagler stayed more private. He was not a big socializer, and unfortunately, he had to spend most of his time caring for his very ill wife, and she was not doing well. And when the doctors diagnosed Mary with tuberculosis, they recommended a more warmer climate. So the couple traveled to Jacksonville, Florida. Sadly, Mary never recovered. Now at this point, Flagler is in his 50s. He had mansions in New York City and Long Island. He had a grandson named after him. He could have retired and lived out the rest of his life in absolute luxury. But Florida had captured his heart. He remarried, this time to Mary's nurse, Ida Alice, and began what would become one of the most remarkable second acts in American history. He built a grand hotel in St. Augustine called the Ponce de Leon, and you all know it now as Flagler College. How many of you have visited Flagler College? If you haven't, you have to go see it. It's one of the most beautiful campuses.
Everybody still, you can all hear back there, correct?
You can?
Sorry to interrupt, but you're good. You're fine.
Have you been able to hear from the beginning?
Yes.
Because otherwise I'll start over.
Okay.
When asked why he was building a resort hotel, which is so far flung from the oil industry, he said, "For the last 14, 15 years, I've been devoting my time exclusively to business. Now I'm going to do things that I enjoy." But he wasn't done. He built another hotel, the Alcazar, also in St. Augustine. And then he turned his eye to railroads. You have to imagine, Florida was wild in those days. There were no roads. How would the rich come down and enjoy his fine resorts? He had to find a way. So he had a vision to connect the east coast of Florida with one seamless railroad, bringing tourists, business, and development with it. He extended his railroad first to Ormond Beach, and then Daytona Beach, then Palm Beach, where he built the original Breakers Hotel. And in the 1890s, he then turned his attention further south, which, remember, back then, Miami was nothing more than a muddy little settlement called Fort Dallas, with fewer than 500 people. That's how it was 1890s to about the turn of the last century. About 500 inhabitants called Fort Dallas. But Flagler struck a deal with Julia Tuttle, one of the area's earliest pioneers. In exchange for land, he agreed to bring the railroad and with it the future of the city. There are many mythologies involved with how that transaction took place, or what Julia Tuttle did or did not do. I don't know what the truth is, whether she sent him oranges and said, "Come on down." All I know is they struck a deal. Land in exchange for a railroad. Flagler is also the reason that Fort Dallas became Miami, the Magic City. Do you know when the city was incorporated in 1896, do you know what the people wanted to name it? Flagler. It would be Flagler, Florida. Now think about it. If you had heard that, that has a kind of a ring to it. Flagler, Florida, right? It could have been that. But Henry Flagler said, "No, I don't want you naming the city after me." He then acquiesced and let them name Flagler Road. Flagler, is it road?
Flagler Street.
Flagler Street after him. He wanted a better name. So he hired a PR company, and they came up with Miami, which I've heard it means Sweetwater, I've heard it means mouth of the river, I don't know. That's an Indian name. And the PR agent also wrote a beautiful ad saying that the city down south was magic. It was springing up as if by magic on the shores of Biscayne Bay. And that became the city's moniker based on this ad that went out across the country. Okay, so down here, he built the Royal Palm Hotel, and he transformed Miami into a destination. Can you imagine that? This was all part of this big marketing campaign to get people to come down on his trains and fill up his hotels. But then, that wasn't enough, right? At the age of 74, when most people back then had long retired, Flagler made the most daring decision of his life, and he announced he was going to extend the railroad all the way to Key West. Now, Key West was the largest city in Florida at that time. How was he going to do it? He's going to build this railroad over water, across swamps, and through some of the harshest terrain in the country. People called it Flagler's Folly. They made fun of him. Even his friends thought he was crazy. And one said, "Flagler, you need a guardian." But Flagler believed Key West, being close to the future Panama Canal, would become a major global port. He poured his heart and his fortune into building what became known as the Overseas Railroad. Originally, it was Oversea Railroad. It took 7 years. Remember that. There were hurricanes, losses piled up. The railroad and his hotels were bleeding money. But on January 21st, 1912, Henry Flagler, now 82 years old and almost completely blind, rode the first train into Key West. And he said it was his crowning achievement. The passenger service was a hit, but freight traffic, the moneymaker, never came in the way he expected. He had spent over $27 million, close to $1 billion today, laying 156 miles of track, and the railroad was losing $400,000 a year, which is $14 million in today's money. And then a year later, In 1913, Henry Flagler passed away. Now, he was not broke by any means, but he had spent a fortune building Florida. At the time of his death, he had about $100 million left, which is around $3 billion today. While not in rags, considering that his old partner, Rockefeller, had $1.4 billion at the time of his death, which today would be $30 billion. Well, you got to think about that. My husband tells me that if you started out with $30 billion and ended with $3 billion, you would consider yourself broke. And Florida, well, Florida would not be the same today without Henry Flagler. He built cities out of swamps. He brought trains where there were no roads. He made people believe in a future that no one else could see. Henry Flagler may have lost much of his wealth, but he gave Florida its modern foundation and left a legacy far greater than money. Now we turn our attention to this handsome gentleman, a wild story, a crazy guy named Carl Graham Fisher, a scrappy, half-blind kid from Greensburg, Indiana, who basically helped invent modern Miami Beach and a few other minor things along the way. First of all, Carl Fisher didn't exactly thrive in school. In fact, when he was 12 years old, and this is true, he's 12 years old, he stood up in the middle of class, and he walked out. No one stopped him, and he never returned. This was Indiana in the 1880s, and school attendance laws were not really a thing yet. You know, we talk about school choice these days. Well, you did have a choice. You can either go or not, and nobody cared. Not mandatory. His classmates called him the stupidest boy in school, which is harsh. But it turns out Carl was far from stupid. He just couldn't see. He was nearly blind from severe astigmatism, and he didn't get diagnosed until he was 31 years old. Imagine trying to read the chalkboard with blurry vision and thinking it was your fault. Incredibly, despite his poor eyesight, Carl had a talent for all things fast and daring. By 17, he and his brothers were running a bicycle shop. This was in Greensburg to begin with, and they moved over to Indianapolis. Carl was the daredevil of the group. He was riding one-wheelers, he was doing tricks in the street, he was speed racing. He's nearly blind. He loved to perform, but in reality, he was actually pretty shy. He was pretty introverted. Here's what his mother says about that. Like, how can this introverted kid be the showman? She said, Carl was always too absorbed in the thing he was doing to realize it was he who was doing it. Did you get that?
Yeah.
Yeah? That's a pretty poetic way of saying he was totally in the zone. Then came the horseless carriage. While most people were skeptical of these noisy machines, Carl was the first person in Indianapolis to own an automobile. It was a French motor tricycle with a whopping 2.5 horsepower. He quickly converted the bike shop into one of the country's first auto repair shops and dealerships. And true to form, he didn't just sell cars. He put on shows with them, racing, stunts, anything for a crowd. He was a marketing genius before there ever was such a thing. He kept chasing speed and spectacle. He organized car races all around the Midwest and invented something revolutionary at the time, car headlights. Well, he invested in it. He and a friend invested in something called the Presto light. The Presto light, remember that? The first practical automobile headlamp. By 1904, Packard cars were sporting them, and within 6 years, the company was worth $6 million, around $220 million in today's money. Not bad for a guy who walked out of the 7th grade. But poor Carl, was not content with just racing and headlights. He wanted a place to test his new cars at high speed. So he helped build the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Yep, the home of the Indy 500. That was Carl's doing. Then he set his sights on something even bigger, roads. Back then, long-distance driving was a mess. Dirt paths, potholes, no signage. Carl launched a campaign to build America's first transcontinental highway. He called it the Ocean to Ocean Highway, and he started a massive letter writing campaign asking for $10 million in funding. That effort became the Lincoln Highway in 1913, a road stretching from Times Square in New York all the way to San Francisco. It does not remain today except for certain legs of it that got swallowed up into other highway systems. You were naming some of the highways.
Interstate 30.
Interstate 30. Later, he helped build the Dixie Highway connecting Michigan to Miami. And you know, there are little portions of that still around today, right down here in South Florida. He's not done yet. Can you imagine all that this young man has accomplished so far? But then it gets to the magic part of the story, and we're talking about Miami Beach. Carl and his wife Jane visited Miami in 1910. Now, at that time, remember Flagler's time at the turn of the century, 500 residents, and it was Fort Dallas. Now, in 1910, 10,000 residents. They love the warm winter weather, and they bought a house on Biscayne Boulevard, Biscayne Bay, without even seeing it first, sight unseen, classic Carl. And from their new home, they looked lovingly across the bay and saw nothing. Just a swampy, snake-infested strip of mangroves and sand. It was basically a mosquito paradise, and Jane Fisher called it as such. The first time she went over there with Carl to see this little sand spit, this little large sandbar, she was swatting all the mosquitoes, and she was, when can we leave? And then she saw Carl's face. She saw the gleam in his eyes, and she knew that she was done for. Because Carl saw potential. He had a gift for looking at something wild and untamed and imagining a glamorous future. He named the place Miami Beach. And with a lot of dredging work, there was a lot of dredging work going on back then, he started building. And he didn't just build hotels. He built a whole experience. His Flamingo Hotel became the centerpiece of the beach scene. He also built the Pan Coast, the Fleetwood, and Roney Plaza. These were not just places to stay. They were playgrounds for the rich and famous. I will say something about that. After World War I, for a long time, the Mediterranean and all the watering holes of the very, very wealthy were shut off. And so what the developers of early Miami took advantage of was the fact that these people had nowhere to go anymore. And so they were luring them down by creating a paradise down here. And part of the inspiration for the Mediterranean design would be so that they would no longer miss the real Mediterranean to have it here. Carl was all about spectacle. He hosted speedboat races on Biscayne Bay. He designed the boats himself. And sometimes even they were motorized by World War II engines from airplanes. Boats were motorized that way. He even bought an elephant. Yes, an elephant. Right there. First it was named Carl Fisher Jr., but then they renamed her Rosie. And Rosie learned how to carry golf clubs around the course for his guests, because why not? And he wrote several letters to President Warren Harding, because President Harding loved to play golf, and he said, please come down, please come down. And President Harding got so tired of the begging, he finally came down. So there's a shot of him with Rosie with his golf clubs. By 1924, the Florida land boom was in full swing. People were flipping property for profit like it was the Wild West. And you know, Miami really was, this area down here, the final frontier in America. Okay? And guess what? Our Florida legislature, they really helped out a lot, because in 1924, they voted to change the state constitution to eliminate income and inheritance taxes. And that was done to attract the wealthy down here. It's still working today. Am I correct? Oh my goodness, you got this huge influx, new wave of people from New York and New Jersey trying to escape the high taxes up there. It started in 1924 for the very same reason. Did you know that from the governor on down back there, they were all bankers. They were all investors in Florida. Everyone was in on this thing. And it really, really worked. And I mentioned in 1925 alone that 2.5 million people came to Florida. Back then, you didn't even have to have a real estate license to sell real estate, nor did you have to have an office. And so what suddenly happened was a bunch of dirty kids came down, like seriously little kids, like not little kids, but teenagers, these boys. And they were often dirty because they're running around, because Miami was dirty. Nothing was paved, right? And they would carry these big binders of all these properties for sale. And because they had New York accidents, they didn't say binders, they say binda. So they became known as the Binda Boys. They go, hey mister, you'll be rich by midnight. And the courts were overloaded. They didn't know how to handle these things. They had I can't remember, like 3 months to close a deal back then. And so they would sell this, it was a Ponzi scheme, sell the property over and over and over again. And that's how the prices got wild. They got way past what the properties were worth. And people were buying things sight unseen all over the place and just gambling the money. And the thing is, and these stories were going wild all across the country, and many of the stories were true. People were making fortunes down here. Okay, well, Carl's net worth was estimated at $100 million, which is well over $1.5 billion today when adjusted for inflation. And Carl was living like a king, unlike Henry Flagler. He had yachts, beautiful yachts, mansions. At the height of the boom, he was spending $1,000 a day on personal expenses, which is $18,000 in today's money, which, I don't know, I know a lot of women down here who might be matching that. He hosted lavish parties at his mansions. He actually had, even though, like, at his hotels and everything, booze was being sold, and whenever, the cops were drinking too. I mean, everyone was drinking. And, but they had to hide it when somebody came around, they were hiding. So at his house, he had a pit in his yard, and he buried all the booze. And when he'd have a party, he'd have kind of a fun time, but they'd dig up the booze. And he'd make a big story out of it. He was always a showman, right? Something else that he loved to do was light cigars with $100 bills, just for laughs. Carl was a gambler, both in business and in lifestyle. He didn't like to dress up. He wore, very floppy clothes all the time, and he swore a lot, and he was always smoking a cigar. He was having a grand old time. But as we all know, booms don't last forever. And so by late 1925, the cracks were showing. Carl had already shifted his focus to Montauk, New York, where he planned to build a northern version of Miami Beach. And he poured all of his money into it. The sales were slow, the economy was cooling, and then came the crash of 1929. By 1932, his Montauk project was foreclosed on, and the debts were piling up. And then there was the knockout punch to Miami Beach, the 1926 hurricane that devastated South Florida, followed by the Great Depression. For those of us watching our portfolios right now, we think we have it bad. People lost fortunes, everything overnight back then. She's very upset by this whole thing, thinking about people losing their money. So, well, guess what? Carl lost his fortune. His Florida properties were foreclosed upon. His company went bankrupt. And then in 1935, Carl Fisher, one of the richest men in America at one point, declared personal bankruptcy. He had always been a heavy drinker, but in his final years, it got worse. It got way worse. And he ended up renting a room in a small cottage on Miami Beach that belonged to a friend of his. He died in 1939 at the age of 65. At the time of his death, most people had no idea that he was the man who dreamed up Miami Beach, helped invent the auto industry, created the Indy 500, and sparked America's first cross-country highway. He died an unknown. But Carl Fisher was not in it for the fame or the fortune. He was in it for the thrill, for the challenge, the speed, the spectacle. He saw what others couldn't and had the guts to make it real. A high school dropout, nearly blind, and endlessly bold, Carl Fisher helped shape modern America, one wild idea at a time. And of course now, today, we remember him as Mr. Miami Beach. And Fisher Island was named after him. A lot of people think he named Fisher Island. He did not. He's one of those stories of someone who died not knowing that anyone knew anything about what he had done. Probably thinking he was an abject failure. One friend commented about him. He built street speedways, skylines, and seaside cities. But Carl Fisher's real fuel was pure, unfiltered vision. Unfortunately, it didn't come with a seatbelt. And now, let's take a walk, shall we? Down the wide, tree-lined boulevards of Coral Gables, the fountains are splashing. The coral walk gateways grandly greet visitors, and the Mediterranean revival architecture makes you feel like you stepped into a Spanish village from a dream. But behind this picture-perfect city lies a story that's far more dramatic than its serene streets suggest. George Merrick. George Edgar Merrick, visionary, poet, marketer, farmer, dreamer, and ultimately a man whose life swung from unimaginable fortune to heartbreaking failure, all before his 57th birthday. He was born in 1886 in the chilly town of Springdale, Pennsylvania. By the age of 13, he and his family moved by then from Duxbury, Massachusetts, down to this wild, swampy, still mostly untamed South Florida. Can you imagine at that time? That move would change the course of his life and Miami's. Young George helped his father tend to the citrus groves that they planted, and it was just basically rugged frontier land. And if this had been the whole story, he'd have made more than a decent life. He was a smart, hard-working guy. But in his early 30s, he decided to transform a couple of 100 acres of Florida scrubland into a booming fruit and produce business. I'm getting ahead of myself there. So he took his dad's land, they bought this land, and they built these groves. When the groves come to bear, and they had an incredibly successful produce business, and he could have lived his whole life as a very wealthy farmer. But farming couldn't contain George Merrick. He was a man of vision. He was a romantic, a poet. Literally, his poems were published, poems and short stories. He loved literature, and he dreamed of more than just guava and tomatoes. While studying at Rollins College, he fell in love with a small planned city called Winter Park. He just loved their orderly streets, the cohesive architecture. It spoke to him. And so he began to imagine a city of his own, one that would be the perfect city. A city born not from randomness, but from rhythm, from poetry. A city beautiful. Now, the City Beautiful movement was sweeping across Europe and America at that time. This was a belief that urban spaces could be both functional and gorgeous. Merrick caught on to that idea and saw a future city rising out of his groves, a Mediterranean-inspired utopia that he named Coral Gables, named after President Grover Cleveland's summer home called Gray Gables in Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts. All right? Now, that's a whole lot better than what Merrick's father had proposed, of naming the city Wagonia. That was named after the school that his mother, Althea, organized. The name of Althea's school was Wagonia. So, and let me tell you, the man knew how to dream big and sell even bigger. He and his wife, Eunice, literally laid out the streets of Coral Gables on their dining room table, naming all the streets after towns in the Tales of the Alhambra by Washington Irving. He built majestic coral rock entrances, grand fountains, lush promenades, tree-lined streets with stately oaks, and a hotel so lavish, the Biltmore, you'd think it was airlifted straight from Spain. By 1926, the great Florida land boom of 1925 was cooling. George Merrick had it all by that time. He had built, in about a 2-year period, 2,000 homes. He built golf courses, a grand hotel, and that wasn't the only hotel he built. His personal net worth was the equivalent to about $40 million today, but he doesn't have the Carl Fisher wealth because he put every penny right back in. So to say he had $40 million was quite something. And then, just like that, came the crash. The Florida land boom went bust almost overnight. And then a catastrophic hurricane swept through South Florida in September 1926, damaging everything, including George Merrick's dream city. And then, of course, as we've talked about, the stock market crash in 1929 and the Great Depression, defaults piled up. People just abandoned their properties. They stopped paying their mortgages. Lawsuits followed. He was accused of mismanaging funds. He was removed from the Coral Gables Commission. He became persona non gratis in the city of his own making. And so he drank. He was witnessed publicly drunk. And he disappeared into depression. By the early 1930s, George Merrick, once the toast of Miami, was flat broke. He was actually $75 million in paper debt and barely holding on. His final hope was a bailout from a wealthy friend, Henry Doherty. But then Doherty died suddenly. And along with him, Merrick's last hope. Did he give up? No. In 1940, Merrick pulled himself together and he got sober. He landed a job as postmaster of Miami, and he threw himself into that job with the same gusto that he had given Coral Gables. Can you imagine? This man of such amazing wealth, he comes back, he gets sober, and he takes a job as postmaster, which is a decent job, but it's a far fall, and he threw himself into it. He made something of it. But you know, the stress of his life had already taken its toll. His health failed, and in 1942, he passed away at just 56 years old, again, believing he had failed. Now, a good friend of ours recently passed away at 56. You know who that is? Mark Trowbridge. Mark Trowbridge was, and everyone has said how young Mark was and what he was giving to the city as president of the Chamber of Commerce. And think about that, George Merrick was the same age. You can imagine just how young George Merrick was, right? And yet, he thought he died a failure, but walk through Coral Gables today and tell me that that man failed. His poetry in stone still stands. The grand entrances, the fountains, the boulevards, the Biltmore Hotel restored to its former glory. Yes, Mother, you had a hand in that. The city he built is one of the most unique, beautiful, and livable spaces in America today. You don't need a GPS to tell you when you've entered Coral Gables, and you don't need one to tell you when you've left Coral Gables. It just feels different here, doesn't it? It feels intentional, because it is. Even Merrick himself, long forgotten in the 60s and 70s when the Biltmore sat in ruins, is now remembered and honored. Thanks to the Coral Gables Preservation Board and the Mediterranean Ordinance passed by the city, his legacy was reclaimed. Today, the Coral Gables Chamber of Commerce gives out the George Merrick Award for those who embody his passion. An award, by the way, created by my husband. His statue stands outside Coral Gables City Hall. His vision lives on in every Spanish fountain and coral rock wall. George Merrick teaches us that the greatest dreams come with risk, that passion can lift us up to impossible heights, and sometimes, yes, bring us crashing down. But in the end, what matters is what we leave behind. And I believe that to be the case for Henry and Carl as well. George Merrick left behind a city that still stuns people a century later. A reminder that even a poor farmer with a dream can carve beauty into the wilderness, and that the true measure of success isn't money, but legacy. So. Here we go, the quiz. The quiz. Were you listening? Were you listening? Again. Okay, here I'm going to start with this book. Last Train to Paradise. I love this book. It reads like a movie. I love historic books, nonfiction books, that read like fiction. This one does. But if you've read it, or you don't intend to read it, don't play the game. Okay, now, how long did it take to build the Overseas Railroad? Yes? Good. So you said it back there first? Okay.
Raise your hand. Raise your hand.
Okay, your book. All right. I want you guys to yell out. Yell out. If you get the next answer, yell it out, okay? because I can't see all the hands. This next book is going to be Bubble in the Sun, because I don't have a book about Carl Fisher to give you. But I love this book. Again, don't play the game if you've read it, or have it, or don't intend to read it. What was the name of the headlight that Carl invested in? Who said that? Okay, you did, right there. Presto Light. Presto Light. Okay, then comes Arvo Park's amazing book, Son of the South Wind. This, again, is, I mean, it's a page turner. I think I read this all in 1 week, and I've read it more than once. Okay, what was the name of the city that inspired George to build Coral Gables?
Great Gables.
No, Ray Gables. That's how Coral Gables was named.
Someone said the right word.
Someone already. Did someone say? Who said Winter Park first? There you go. And now, Patrick Alexander has donated one of his books. All right, do you want to start the quiz?
Yeah.
Want to do the quiz?
George, as June has explained so eloquently, is responsible for Coral Gables. He didn't do it alone. Who can name 5 members of his dream team?
Cheating, but I know. Phineas Pace.
Denman Fink.
So we've got Denman Fink. Okay, don't do 5 because only one person gets it. Denman Fink, Phineas Pace.
George Merrick.
Yes.
Spouse is not allowed.
This is a hard one because you didn't speak on this subject. If we can't get this one, I've got another one we can do. A fun one.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, wait.
I can give you the other 2.
You think you know it? Okay. I've got another one.
I'll read him.
Oh, the answer to that one is
I'll read him.
So, sorry. Obviously, Denman Fink, who I think is his uncle, his mother's youngest son, I think was the most influential. But then there was another cousin, George Fink, who does an awful lot of the houses in Coral Gables. Then there was Phineas Pace, who was famous first of all because of the Sky and the Deering Estates. Dr. Dammers is the man who sold Snowden Eskimos and he sold Coral Gables to anybody who would come. How many is that?
And Frank landscape architect.
Most developers these days, they're forced to plant trees when the local ordinance is forcing them. Frank Button, right from the beginning, with Brennan Olmsted and Central Park, he planned this as a garden city right from the beginning. So I love that.
that's wonderful. No, I'm going to have him sign. He will. He's going to sign it to the person who wins, but someone has to win. So I just want to say one thing, that there's so many great books about the history of Miami and Coral Gables, and I've enjoyed, I love reading about history, but what I intended to do was bring these people to life on stage. And so what this play does is allow you to meet George Merrick and Doc Dammers and Carl Fisher and Jane Fisher and William Jennings Bryan. They're all going to come on stage, and as I was doing my research, every time I saw a direct quote from one of them, I wrote it down and I weaved it into the dialogue. And so it's like history come to life. We're doing it multimedia. I did a lot of research on finding old footage of that time, like after the hurricane, things like that. And that's almost a character in the play. It's going to be like this black and white history, and then history come to life in front of it. So I hope that you'll see it. We've got postcards to hand out about it, and you can tell all your friends too. So, okay, let's try this again. This is kind of my husband came up with this one. So it's you got to think cleverly. All right. So
Let him do it.
no, okay. It's something that all 3 men have in common. Okay. When they died, what percentage of their wealth did they leave behind? And when they died, what percentage of their wealth, am I saying it right? what percentage of their wealth do they leave behind? You got it. 100%. No matter how much you make in life, no matter what, when you leave, you can't take any of it with you.
Oh, Jude, so eloquent. I mean, you are a wonderful storyteller, and we're so looking forward to this play. It's wow, what a great introduction to this centennial. I mean, I feel that your play is going to make our centennial, so it's very, very exciting. And I will make sure that every one of you gets a postcard, so you have to buy your tickets quickly. And opening night is actually our actual centennial evening, so that is super, super special. And
It's
April 29th.
It's the only event planned in the city on the centennial day.
Which is a smart thing for them to do, so that everybody can come to it. And it's going to be a remarkable evening with the part of Miracle Mile closed, and you might want to mention something.
I'm not a great self-promoter, but here you go. For the opening night, it's not black tie, it's just come in 1920s garb, but that opening night we have like a pre-show reception, and we have the play, and then we're going to do a big dinner outside. It's going to be a lovely, lovely evening. That's through the Chamber of Commerce, because the Chamber of Commerce is also celebrating its 100th birthday. And so then for all the rest of the nights, which is April 30th, May 1st, 2nd, and then a matinee on May 3rd, the tickets are being sold through Actors Playhouse. So that's just coming to see. So this is pricey. Yes. This is not. So you have to decide. Do you want to have a ton of fun? Do you want to come see the show? It's going to be fun no matter what. I'll be there every single show.
June talked a little bit about these visionaries who did feel their share of stress throughout all of their endeavors, and I'm sure that writing the play and sitting at the auditions that you were actually able to watch, I mean, I'm sure it was, it had its moments of stress. So we have just a little something.
One last thing. We searched all over South Florida for a George Merrick, and we could not find a George Merrick. We were being extremely picky. Just one last thing. We're bringing our George Merrick down from New York. Not on the train, but he's coming down, and he's a Broadway actor, and he's going to be amazing.
Oh, wonderful. Well, June, stay right here. So it's our little gift from the Merrick House is a stress reliever. It is a sugar scrub made with moringa oil by one of the ladies who often sells at our events, and she hand makes these. It does not drying, and it's a company called Gifted by Nature. Female owned and small business.
Thank you.
So with our compliments, thank you so much for educating all of us today. How lovely! We want to tell you a couple of things. We let no dust gather in this home, and there's always something happening at the Merrick House. So 2 things. The first Saturday of every month, we gather in the garden from 8 to 9 a.m. to take in that all-important morning light and be good stewards of the garden that Mother Merrick loved so. Yesterday, we tidied up the bushes that were recently trimmed on the east lawn and cleared out the expired heliconia stalks at the back grotto. They look really great now. The fish are happy. And it is amazing what can be accomplished in 1 hour with team effort. We call it AGB, Althea's Garden Brigade. So all you have to do is bring your gloves, your clippers, your water bottle, and your enthusiasm for light gardening. No need to reserve in advance. So that's the first Saturday of every month. And on Sunday, May 4th, so the night after the play closes, we have more Merrick for you. You need to go to church, and that's because this guy, Henry George Great Rake Fink, says so, yes. He will make an appearance at 2 p.m. at the Coral Gables Congregational Church. During this Merrick House Centennial event, reenactor Robert Dawson will tell us the Merrick story from Grandpa Fink's perspective. And this free event is sure to fill the pews. So I hope you will tell all of your friends, and you will be seeing something that is looking like this coming from the city of Coral Gables soon. But so it's going to be a really lovely afternoon. We're saying that Henry George Great Fink was his Fink's magic oil was so powerful that it allowed him to come back from the dead to tell us the story about George Merrick. And finally, there are four, count them, four exquisite antique colonial style chairs behind. Three of them are behind the piano. These are not Merrick furniture, but they are for sale. They were donated by a friend of mine for our vintage sale in March, and they didn't go, but I happen to know the home from which they came, and everything in that home was impeccably kept and cared for. So if you happen to fall in love with these antique chairs, come speak with me, and we can make a deal. So I hope you can all stay for our reception. Is there anything I've forgotten, folks? Carmen Kaysen, one of our board members, has also joined us, so you'll be able to say hello to her as well on the porch. So thanks again, June. It was wonderful. All right.
Amazing.